Tansei ni wakamaganek. My name is Kim Weiss, and I'm happy to introduce myself. Today, and I can only speak for today, if someone at my workplace were to ask me about my heritage, I would honestly feel a twinge of discomfort. Discomfort because even though the stories of my ancestors live in my bones and my blood, I don't truly know the land that my ancestors walked upon or the languages that they spoke. I'm so disconnected from those traditions that there's this void in my heart that has longing, and it feels really uncomfortable. I'm not sure I can fully greet you with my whole being, so I hope you understand. One day recently at work, the uncomfortable conversation came up when referring to nationality, recognizing that First Nations didn't come to their land on their own desire, and many cultural groups were broken up and displaced. So I asked my team how they introduced themselves with all this complexity. One strong Nakota woman said point blank, "Depends on who's asking." This response outlined a discomfort with the question, just like the discomfort I feel about not knowing my own heritage. Because as a wise woman once said, explaining where you're from does not give the complexity of the relationships that occurred to be from that land and that place. So as I attempt to situate myself and introduce myself, I hope it will also inspire you to know me more, and I'd love to sit with any of you and share some tea and some stories. I am dirty fingernails and digging in soil with seeds deep in my pockets. I'm jam maker, tomato sauce, and planning for hard winters ahead. I am baker and sweet auntie birthday cake maker. I am lefse, roll cookin, and good fine wine. I am singer, drummer, and music in my bones. I am daughter, mother, deadly auntie, partner, and breadwinner. I am wrinkles and deep belly laughter. I'm stubborn, feisty, and full of questions. I am the gift of sleep. I am outside no matter the weather. I am Kim. These are my parents, the center and in the center of my universe. I grew up thinking there were only two cultures one could be. Your mother had one and your father had one, German and Norwegian. I didn't question why my one grandma was black and my grandpa spoke in languages I didn't know. All I knew was that they both loved to laugh and they gave great hugs. My grandmother Helen was very eccentric. She loved bright flowers and red lipstick and flowing skirts. We spent the summers at her place eating her bad cooking and her burnt baking. She didn't have the domestic skills my other grandma had, but she had makeup and dress-up clothes and wild patterns everywhere. She gave me the gift of music. My grandfather was a nose tweaker and a hard-working, dedicated man who always smelled of bad cologne and could also dance a jig at the drop of a hat. My grandparents on my mother's side lived across the street, and they basically raised me. My grandfather taught me how to garden, and my grandmother taught me how to can and preserve. She also taught me how to knit and sew, and taught me how to sit still when my restless body couldn't when I was small. I grew up eating lefse, a rolled soft Norwegian flat potato bread that my family smeared with way too much butter. My grandmother would always tell me that if I didn't put more butter on my lefse, I'd dry up. And when I was around the grade 4, I had to interview my grandparents to find out where they were from. And I remember asking my grandfather, who always replied, cross between a signpost and a jackass. It's because he didn't know. He only knew that he was born in Pennsylvania and came here to work as a laborer to work with horses. My grandmother, on the other hand, knew that she was a purebred Norwegian, and this is where our good hips and love of butter come from. She just passed away this summer at the age of 99. All of these people and the stories have shaped who I am today. My great-grandfather on my father's side was from Chihuahua, Mexico. My great-grandfather married a Mexican woman, Maria, or so I thought. What I found out in my research was that I'm not Mexican by heritage. My ancestors were Russian Mennonites who fled to Manitoba when the Russians got drafted in the First World War. Being pacifists, they refused to fight, so from Manitoba they fled to Mexico in the early 20s. But then a provincial law was passed requiring secular education curriculum only in schools. and they were deeply religious, so they moved to the south to start new colonies and continue their religious beliefs. My grandmother Helen was born in Mexico, but then they moved back to Saskatchewan to join a Mennonite community due to the poor living conditions in Mexico a couple years later. They lived near the Herbert Goultown area where my great-grandmother Maria died later in childbirth. My great-grandfather outlived a couple more wives after that, but they only spoke German, and I have very little memory of them. Although the German was probably not real German, it was called Plaudeutsch. On my maternal side, these are my great-grandparents, Dell Bowditch and Agnes Kraft. Their ancestors left England. They left England in the 1600s due to religious persecution of the English Catholic Church. They were either Puritans or pilgrims who helped the English escape. They resided on the shores of New York and later moved to Pennsylvania, where they set up churches. And I hope they were part of the Quaker movement who were the first to protest slavery, but those are only my hopes, and it's not in any written history books. They came to Canada after my grandfather was born in the US, which was around 1920, with the promise of free land due to the Dominion Land Act. And they were part of the settler invasion. They were farming near the Mossbank area. Before they were moved by the government to better land during the Great Drought to the Lestock-Kelleher area to save some of their animals. My grandmother's family is all Norwegian, and they mostly still reside in Norway. My great-grandfather, Hans, was the only one who left Norway because he was the youngest, as this is still the tradition today where the youngest gets no inheritance. So he left to America with the promise of land. He married another girl from Norway, and they also came to Canada around the same time with the promise of land, farm, and work. I was a bit of a feisty child. I grew up asking questions, and I was insanely curious. I never liked following the rules. I was a problem child, and I was always in trouble. I started earning my own money in grade 2 with a paper route, and I always paid my own way, ensuring my independence. I grew up at a summer camp on Last Mountain Lake, which shaped my love of nature. During my first year of university, I heard about an exchange program called Canada World Youth, where you live in a developing country for 4 months, living with a family and volunteering in the community. And then you spend 4 months in Canada with a counterpart from the partnering country doing the same thing. Well, my placement was in rural Jamaica and Newfoundland. The skills I learned in this program are unsurmountable. This was my first teaching job. Depending on how many kids showed up on any given day, I had the job of teaching 30 to 50 3- and 4-year-olds preschool with no training. Their school had burned down, so we had very few resources, but it definitely shaped a large part of who I am today. Although I was destined to be a teacher, I didn't want to listen to that inner voice. And so after traveling the world and seeing some exotic corners like India, Malaysia, Japan, Jamaica, South America, and Canada, while I was out east, I found my next adventure. The Canadian College of Natural Medicine, of Acupuncture and Traditional Chinese Medicine in Bedford, Nova Scotia, offered a different path, an uncomfortable path, definitely not expected or defined by anyone in my family. After receiving my diploma of acupressure and doing a lot of qigong, I returned to Regina to complete a science degree in the hopes of continuing on in acupuncture. I was critical of the way the science classes were taught, and my mom thought I should be a teacher if I had so many opinions about education, in addition to swaying me into a more traditional role. Seeing as my mom at the time cleaned houses to pay for my tuition and paying for my university, I listened, and I applied to education, and I worked pretty hard. After receiving my education degree, I taught for 4 years at Ranchero Society, where I started their first developmental classroom for kids who also don't like following the rules, and then moved on to the public system for a short stint. After teaching in the public school setting, I knew that my pedagogy did not align. After some deep reflection, a supportive community, and every determined bone in my body, I started my own school. In 2006, I founded Prairie Sky School, an independent land-based school grounded in the pillars of holistic education, using the lenses of art, community, and nature to learn through. I didn't get paid a cent for the first 5 years of running the school, and I subbed on the side a day a week to earn a bit of cash. We started with 12 students in a church basement, and now Prairie Sky is thriving with over 120 students and over 15 staff. Prairie Sky School doesn't put children into grades. The children are divided into multi-age groups named after plants: taproots, fireweeds, wolf willows, starflowers, cattails, and rosebuds, which also have Nehewak names. There are no grades, or there's no graded report cards or standardized assessments. The school has an Indigenous cultural support person, elders, a strong community, and the classes are taught from a place-based lens. This is where my true heart and pedagogy live. My pedagogy says a lot about my journey through education and my beliefs as a whole. I believe in teaching to the heart, the head, the heart, and the hands of each individual as we develop and grow into whole beings, mentally, spiritually, and physically together. I believe that in every classroom or workplace, there's 4 teachers. One is the environment, the learning space, which includes the community and the land. 2 is the parents or the family, the extended family, and the community. 3 is the teacher, and 4 is the student. I believe that nature is our teacher and supplier of resources for which we should be respectful and forever grateful. Nature also reminds us that we're alive, especially when we feel the bite of cold on our skin in the freezing winter. I believe that art is the ultimate tool to express and show our learning, and it should be integrated into every lesson. I believe in multidimensional learning with blending subjects together as a whole to complement the learning. I believe in teacher as learner and in the development of self on a continuous basis. I believe in learning through and from community. I believe in meeting students where they are at in their own development, and that each student holds an immense amount of gifts to be shared with the world. I believe that above all, there should be joy in learning, and the foundation between the relationship in the classroom and the teachers should be grounded in compassion and love. I would be amiss if I didn't speak about my heart, my partner of 23 years, and my 2 sons. I met my partner Steve when I was in grade 8, and he's been my best friend and confidant ever since. My 2 sons are Tenzin, who's named after the Dalai Lama, and Elliot, who's named after a favorite musician. Both of my sons have special needs. They have what's called Fragile X syndrome, as well as autism and other complex needs. This means that even though they're age 17 and 19, cognitively they're around the age 4. They require assistance with bathing, hygiene, and daily life skills. They're going to both require 24-hour care their whole life. Raising them was, and continues to be, a really tough job. But it also means that me and my partner are forced to be super parents because we don't really have a choice. We do hard things every day. We make our kids ski and hike to the top of steep mountains. We make them mountain bike and go on canoe trips and learn new skills. It also means that these guys, they're actually quite funny, they're helpful, they're quirky, and they've introduced us to communities and places we didn't even know existed. They've enriched and expanded our worlds immensely. I am a carrier of Fragile X myself, which means I also struggle with many personal health issues, and because of it, struggle with anxiety, high cortisol levels, some women's health issues, have a high chance of diabetes and other autoimmune disorders. But this means our family has to live the Fragile X way. While I was spending most of my days in nature with small children, in 2008, I was recruited to lead transformation for education with Indigenous Services Canada, where my role is supporting new regional education agreements as a stepping stone to self-government or governance models, and reshaping funding for First Nations living on reserve. I work daily with First Nation directors of education and the chiefs in Saskatchewan as a government representative to Canada. I went from playing outside with children on a daily basis to frontline reconciliation and way too many rules. It was supposed to be a 2-year term, but I'm still in this role. It's extremely uncomfortable, to say the least. I feel like all my roles up to this point in my life have required intense transformational change. I'm continuously questioning my role, my own personal comfort levels in decolonization efforts, and personal transformative learning in my job and my contributions to truth and reconciliation. As a white female, co-leading an Indigenous transformative framework is extremely uncomfortable. The funding process is meant to be led by First Nations. However, the process was never designed by First Nations. It was co-developed by the Assembly of First Nations in Canada using colonial provincial frameworks that are already fraught with conflict and will never align with the needs in First Nation controlled schools. So I feel the need to grow personally so I can be strong in community and in my relationships. Community leadership requires strength, and for myself, it should be framed as a journey of self-exploration and unlearning, followed by new learning and new practices in a cycle of critical reflection, being accountable for my actions and the messages I'm passing on. My role has power, and I need to recognize this and use this power for good. There's no space for white fragility as I continue this journey, and I need to ask myself, what is my transformative learning going to look like? How can I lead with respect and compassion? How can I engage in challenging or uncomfortable dialogue? What are my strengths as a leader, and how can I learn from others around me? What risks do I need to take? This is what I came up with as a mantra for grounding my work and what I would want to see in a leader. Deep reflective practice, engaging in radical openness, anti-racist pedagogies, acknowledgement of oneself, awareness of the social constructs of power, accountability for one's actions, sharing the workload, and learning from nature. In conclusion, I hope you enjoyed a little glimpse into my life and my family. You are all invited to reach out to me if you'd like to sip tea, go for a walk, or just chat. I look forward to meeting all of you and to learning together. Ikose.